Hey friends, be sure to check out my newest review of the movie Pumpkinhead over on Patreon. It's 2 hours of analysis and yapping for your enjoyment, and be sure to let us know the next film we should check out. Thanks. Now enjoy the stories. Almost a whole 10 years ago now, in the spring of 2017, I dropped my bag after walking out of a store downtown. It was mortifying. Everyone saw, these two girls laughed, and I had to get on my hands and knees on the dirty sidewalk to gather up my things. That is, until a very handsome man stopped to help. It made me feel even worse in a way, being perceived so hard during the aftermath of a clumsy moment. But at the same time, it was very welcome. His name was Aiden. He had brown hair and brown eyes, and he was kind of like a cross between Pete Davidson and Zac Efron, in that he was handsome, tall, and with a kind of quirky streak, I guess. He helped me pick up my stuff, told me that it happens to the best of us, and then made some joke about how I probably did it on purpose, to show off all the cool stuff I had in there. Now, I told him that unless tampons and IBS medication are now considered cool, then all I did was embarrass myself, to which Aiden jokingly replied that since he helped me out, I should take him out for a drink. Now, I hadn't been on a date in over a year by then, so I half joked back that he should be careful what he wished for. But that's how we ended up swapping numbers and then talking a little before we arranged a date. We just went for a 20-minute coffee at first, nothing major, and then when seeing Aiden again turned out to be fun, we arranged an actual date like at a restaurant. Aiden was an attractive guy, but when he showed up to the restaurant, goddamn, he was looking fine. He had a white shirt with the sleeves rolled, and he smelled great, as in he hadn't drowned himself in cologne like some guys do, which kind of suggested to me a wider pattern of having figured things out, so to speak. He also purposely didn't shave because on our coffee date, I mentioned something about appreciating a little stubble. So not only did he look great, but that kind of showed me that he listened too, you know? Now what I'm trying to say is that it was all green flags, and since I was feeling so smug with myself, I took a picture of him in secret while he was looking down at the menu. I sent the picture to my roommate with a caption saying, "Isn't he beautiful?" Now she replied, "He's a cutie," and then sent back a quirky smiley emoji, and then put my phone down so I could look at the menu. A few minutes went by, and Aiden and I started getting into the nitty-gritty of what we like to eat, like how he wasn't a huge seafood fan and how red meat sometimes felt too heavy for me. A waitress came over and we ordered drinks and appetizers, and then when the drinks came, I picked my phone up off the table to make room for the lady to put the drinks down. And that's when I saw my phone had practically blown up with notifications. All the texts and missed calls were from my roomie, and I saw that one of the texts just said, "Get out now." I read through the others real quick as the lady's putting the drinks down, and then after thanking her, I apologized to Aiden and said my roomie appeared to be having an emergency. He suggested I call her. Now, I said that sounded like a good idea, and then off I went to do just that. Now, once I was outside, I read through her messages to get a better idea of what was going on before I hit call, and this is what I read. My roomie said Aiden was her friend's ex, and that during their relationship, he'd been unhealthily possessive and controlling. My roomie's friend fell for that old cliche of thinking that she could try and fix him, and so she stuck it out for about a month before throwing in the towel and trying to break up with him. But Aiden refused to accept her decision, and not only did he make her life miserable by stalking and harassing her for probably 6 months, but she had to get a restraining order to get him to stop for good. My roommate crammed all of that and more into maybe 10 or 12 short text messages, and then, having read through them, I hit the call button. When she picked up, I didn't tell my roomie that I was on my way to grab a cab or something. I said that I just thought she was wrong. Aiden seemed like the sweetest guy, and it had all been green flags up until then. But when I asked her to confirm the name of her friend's ex, the reply came back in less than a minute. Aiden. My roomie had me on speaker and was texting with her friend whose ex she thought Aiden was. And so maybe a minute after we got the name, my roommate tells me to check my email. Her friend had sent over a picture taken with one of those doorbells with a built-in camera. It must have been a fancy one too, I guess, because it had a night vision setting. And there, in this creepy kind of black and white imagery that showed him with glowing eyes and teeth bared, was Aiden. It was Aiden, all right. There was no mistaking it. But he looked like he belonged in an asylum. He was literally snarling. His eyes looked all wild, and maybe it was just a trick of the light, but it legitimately looked like he had foam frothing from the edges of his mouth, like he was actually rabid. I later learned the picture was a still from a video the doorbell cam had recorded when Aiden stopped by his ex's home and tried convincing her to let him in. She didn't, obviously, but when she refused, he went crazy, and then went on some horrible rant about how she was worthless and wouldn't find anyone better, all that bullcrap. He tried to break into her house too, but apparently came to his senses when she made clear that she was calling the police. And then after that, she had grounds for a restraining order, and so she filed one. Now, I obviously didn't find out all the details until the days after, but at the time, all I needed to see was that picture of him to know that he was a ticking time bomb. But there was just one problem. I had been way too open with him during the first week of talking. Maybe it was the meet cute and how much like a rom-com it felt, and I know him being so hot contributed a whole lot too. But considering this guy was a total psycho, I'd given him way too much personal information to feel anywhere near comfortable in just ducking. My roommate told me to give him an excuse, to say that she'd been in a minor car accident and was really shook up about it or something, and so that's what I went with. I walked back into the restaurant, told him I was so sorry, but that there had been an emergency and I had to go. I told him about the car accident, and at the time, he was just like, "Oh my God, that's terrible. Go be with your friend." But there was something going on underneath, something which made me think that he hadn't altogether bought it. I grabbed my things, walked outside, and grabbed a cab. Now my heart was racing the whole time, and as soon as I managed to catch one, I was on the phone with my roommate saying, "Okay, I'm out of there, now what?" And then once I got home, what followed was more like a war room than a discussion, because we had to figure out how I was going to ditch Aiden without him getting upset and offended. But luckily, we had his ex around to help talk us through it. Now I thought a kind of death by 1,000 cuts approach would work, where I'd just sort of like tell him I was busy over and over until he got the message. But his ex said that that wouldn't work. Aiden was an emotional train wreck, but he wasn't dumb, and he wouldn't appreciate being lied to like that. It'd wound his pride too much, so that was off the table. But lying itself wasn't off the table because according to his ex, we needed to go big. We needed something he wouldn't, or rather couldn't question, but also something he couldn't, disprove. And if I told him a close relative had died, a grandparent or elderly aunt, for example, he might ask about a funeral or something. But if I told him my pet died, and that I'd already taken my dog to be cremated, that was sort of foolproof. I did actually have a dog at the time, like I'd sent Aiden pictures of her and stuff, so it wasn't like I was just pulling someone out of the ether like a distant aunt, because then he'd question why I was so devastated if we weren't close. No. The dog thing seemed perfect, and so after brushing him off just one time with a sort of, "Oh, I'm busy helping my roomie out, she's not back on her feet yet," I hit him with the lie about my dog dying. He bought it hook, line, and sinker, and the exchange was conducted entirely by text too, so I didn't have to fake cry and risk not coming across as actually bereaved. Now, I know he bought it because he love-bombed the crap out of me that night, and while I continued to play the part of a grieving pet owner a little bit, I eventually asked him for some time and space, and he accepted. Now, I thought I'd gotten away with it, and so did my roommate, so we were in a very celebratory mood when she informed Aiden's ex that the plan seemed to have worked. She was happy for us, very happy, but her congratulations came with a sort of warning. Whatever we'd lied to him about, we had to be willing to keep up the fiction for a long, long time, because while Aiden could keep himself physically distant when he needed to, it only made him worse in an emotional sense. For example, she told me to swap out my profile picture for one of my dog because no doubt Aiden would track me down using search engines, and if the appearance didn't match the fiction, then I was in trouble. She also told me not to accept any rando follow requests because there might come a point where Aiden would make what's called a sort of sock puppet account purely for the purposes of stalking me. She gave me a bunch more advice like that, and while it was all very daunting, I was glad to hear it and followed every word. I did wonder if I was just overreacting because, how much could this guy be into me after only a date and a half, really? But whenever I started to doubt whether or not all the caution was worth it, I'd picture that face in the doorbell camera, how monstrous it looked, and I'd come to my senses again. I did all the digital stuff. I even looked up how easy it can be to change my number if Aiden started blowing up my phone. His ex said blocking numbers wasn't enough and that he'd just buy burners to call you from different numbers each time. And it all sounded like some living nightmare, so obviously I did everything I could to avoid it, even with my growing doubts. But no matter how well I kept my internet profile sanitized, there was one very crucial dog-shaped issue: her walks. I couldn't keep my dog cooped up in an apartment for months at a time. I tried cutting her walks down to a bare minimum and walking different routes, but she started getting major zoomies and peeing inside for the first time in years. And I had to switch back to the regular schedule after just a week or so, but that meant going outdoors with the dog that I'd said was dead, going places in a neighborhood Aiden knew I called home. Like I said, I tried changing my routes and going to different parks, but since there was only so much I could do without radically reshaping my schedule, these parks were always within 30 minutes walk at most, meaning there was always this fear in the back of my mind that Aiden would be there, see me, and know I'd been lying. He ended up texting me a few times, asking if I was okay, and I gave him a couple of very convincing maybes before I finally told him I just wasn't in the right headspace to date. I said losing my dog had me thinking about the finite nature of relationships and how losing those close to us was the worst thing in the world. And while that was all in the forefront of my mind, I couldn't date in a way that was honest, truly honest with myself and with that person. Now, it was all complete crap, but like I said, he seemed to buy it well enough because he left me alone, his text stopped, his DMs stopped, and he just dropped off the map, much to my infinite relief. The more I took my dog on her walks, the more I started to relax. And then one day, I walked out of my apartment with my dog, kind of half paying attention to my phone, and right away, she started tugging on her leash. Now, I looked up, and she's trying to make a beeline for what looked like a pile of ground meat that was just sitting there on the sidewalk. It wasn't there the last time I took her for a walk, so I didn't think it'd be rotten or anything. But it's obviously not the smart thing to let your dog eat random meat, so I tugged her away from the little pile and did the same thing when we returned from the walk too. Now, it had been so long since the whole Aiden thing that it didn't even occur to me that the two things might be connected. People drop random crap on the sidewalk every day, and actually a pile of ground meat is probably one of the less offensive things that you're likely to find on a daily basis here, especially in the city. I'd pretty much forgotten about it by the time the next morning rolled around, but then when I took my dog downstairs for her morning walk, there was another pile of ground meat sitting on the sidewalk, but in a totally different place. And that's when I started to think, okay, this isn't just some coincidence now, but I also heard about people trying to tame crows like that, so I didn't sort of assume the worst. I just thought it was strange. But then, as I'm on my way back from the far dog park that I've been taking her to walk, I saw another lady walking a similarly sized dog in front of me. We were both walking at around the same speed and were headed in the same direction, so I was maybe 50 yards from her when she stopped near my apartment building and started chatting with someone she evidently just bumped into. I didn't pay too much attention until I saw how her dog had spotted the pile of meat on the sidewalk. And then, as it approached, with the lady none the wiser, I was thinking, uh-oh, Fido's about to get a second breakfast for sure. I couldn't help but smile, watching this lady and her friend gabbing away while her cute little pooch started sniffing at the meat, and then digging into it like all its Christmases had come all at once. I figured that I'd let her know that her Tuesday was more likely to be diarrhea day after her dog just ate a bunch of random meat. And while I wish to God that I'd had the lady balls to yell something on my approach, I didn't. I took my sweet, ignorant-ass time and then suddenly saw this random guy stopping near the dog and that pile of meat. And at first he was smiling. He kneeled down to pet the dog, but then suddenly reached into the pile of meat and stood up fast holding something small in his hand. He suddenly started yelling, "Yo, lady, what the hell? Watch your damn dog!" The lady turned and said something like, I'm guessing to scold him for talking to her so rudely or whatever, but then she saw what he was holding in his hand, and as I got closer, I did too. It was a razor blade. Whoever put down that pile of meat had carefully inserted a razor blade into it. The dog had been probably a few bites away from slicing its mouth and gums up, or heck, maybe it saw it and was thinking eating around it, but if that was the case, its only saving grace was the fact that it was a small dog who bit off small mouthfuls of it. Swap it out for a big dog, and that razor might have cut the poor thing's throat to ribbons before anyone even realized what was happening. I joined the little gaggle of people who by then were asking, what kind of psycho would do something like that? But I knew. I knew exactly who'd try and hurt a small, innocent animal just to get back at its owner. And that was Aiden. I filed a police report that same day, reporting the razor blades and telling them who I thought it was, too. But I got a call back a few days later saying that they weren't going to act on my report because there was exactly zero proof that it had been Aiden who left that meat and the razor blade. Now, they acknowledged that he'd had a restraining order filed against him and encouraged me to file another report if he tried harassing me in person. But the fact remained that me and him hadn't exchanged a word, and nor had I seen him in coming up to 4 months by then. But I came to realize that's exactly why Aiden had been so restrained, so that when he finally acted, he wouldn't look like a suspect. My building also only had indoor security cameras, nothing to watch the sidewalk outside, so there was no digging up the video like his ex did with that door cam footage. I ended up having one installed afterwards, though. One of those Nest cams that I could view from my phone, but some a-hole came along and poured soda all over it, so I guess that was the end of that. I ended up moving not long after. The Nest camera, in its brief tenure, didn't pick up anyone dropping any more meat, and it didn't catch anyone standing across the street staring up at the apartments or anything either. Now, I didn't even know for sure that it was Aiden who put those razor blades in that meat, but you know who was certain it was him? His ex. She said that that was likely something he'd do and that in all likelihood, he cruised to places he knew I might be and saw me walking my dog. She said it wouldn't be like him to just drop something and move on, and even if the whole lie about my dog had been the truth and she really had passed, he'd still have to come to doubt it at some point and start wondering if I was lying to him. And that was the point that I started to seriously look for a new apartment and not just casually browsing to see if there was anything that struck my fancy, so to speak. If Aiden could never really drop something, if it took almost legal powers to get him to stop, then it'd be cheaper and less time-consuming for me to just find a new apartment. And the whole thing gave me a total complex about dating for literally years, and it wasn't until I met my current boyfriend that I actually started to relax and be myself again. So girls, please, don't just meet up with a guy that you met online after almost a week. Do a little research, ask around, because even in big cities the dating pool is surprisingly small sometimes, and you might just save yourself from going through the same tiresome bullcrap that I did. This happened a couple of months back. I've been debating whether to send this over or just bury it, but after everything that happened, I figured that you might appreciate it for your channel. I've changed my name and a few details in case anyone's still sniffing around, but the core of it is true. So I've been single for a long time, and I was very fed up with scrolling through the apps like some mug. Then, out of nowhere, This girl, Chloe, slid into my Insta DMs and I thought my luck had finally changed. She was like my absolute dream girl. Dark hair, big smile, and from her photos, she looked like she was honestly a riot. We chatted for a week or so and she seemed cool and we were into the same music and joked about the same stupid things. And I felt like we had a ton of chemistry, so it wasn't long before I asked her out and we arranged to meet somewhere on a Saturday night. Now, I turned up at this nice little bar near the canal, and with my after-shave and shirt on, I didn't have to wait long for Chloe to turn up, and when she did, she looked even better than her pictures. The date went great at first. It was easy to chat, tons of laughing, and she kept touching my arm, very flirty, which was honestly a rush. I thought she was the girl of my dreams, and then after a couple of drinks, she suggested we go for a walk to this quiet spot with a nice view over the old warehouses. She said it would be romantic, and I was that excited that I didn't even question it. We wandered off from the main part of town through some side streets and then down towards an empty industrial area. Now, it was towards the end of April, so the sun was starting to go down at about 8:30, and it made the sky look really nice as we went. And she was right. It was very romantic, and my head was in the clouds by the time we got to this old factory with a gap in the chain fence. There was graffiti everywhere, and it didn't look like anyone had been there in years, but Chloe said that she used to go there for adventures with her friends when she was a kid. I thought that sounded really cute, and so in I went after her, like some absolute dummy. And then once we were actually inside, that's when everything went sideways. I was following her into that warehouse when I heard footsteps from behind me, and then before I could even turn around, someone smashed me in the knee with something heavy. Down I went, really hard onto the concrete as pain shot up my legs into my back, and then the next thing I know, there's 3 or 4 dudes on me, wearing tracksuits with their hoods up. One of them had a bat or a pole and was hitting me with it, but another had his phone out filming. They didn't say anything at first, just started laying into me as I screamed out in pain. I tried to curl up into a ball and cover my head, but they were going for it, kicking my ribs, punches to the face, everything. I'd cover my head and they'd kick me in the stomach, and then I'd cover my stomach and they'd kick me in the head. I started to taste blood in my mouth and I knew that I had to try and get away, but when I tried to push myself up, one of them would just stomp on my head. I remember looking at Chloe and begging for help, but instead of running or pulling her phone out to call the police, she didn't do either. She just stepped back and watched. Not shocked, almost bored, like she'd seen it all before, and that hurt worse than the kicks or punches, realizing that it had been nothing but some trap. But while I asked why me in my head, I didn't have to wait long for an answer. They kept going until I stopped trying to get up, and then one of them leaned down close, really close, and told me something like, "This is what happens when people don't learn lessons." I have no idea what they were talking about at first, but then it hit me. They had to have been talking about my brother. There was no other explanation. Now, we hadn't spoken in about 3 years at the time, mainly because he's a complete idiot. He got into smuggling these foreign cigarettes after going on vacation, like the really cheap ones that get sold at different bars and random blocks and that kind of thing, and he made some decent money at it too, until he pissed off the wrong people. They were bigger, physically bigger, but larger in terms of their organization too, and he later said that there were rumors going around that he'd actually taken a shipment and undercut them hard. They warned him to pack it in, but he told them to mind their own business. Well, it turns out they'd been watching him, enough to figure out where me and my mom lived, and then instead of targeting him, they decided to target me instead. Chloe wasn't some baddie that had slipped into my DMs. She was a lure, and they'd picked me because I was the soft target, the younger brother who actually had a normal life and wouldn't suspect anything. Their plan was to get me, film me, and then send it to my brother as a message. A real old-school intimidation tactic, and you know what? It worked. I don't know how long the kicking lasted. It felt like it went on forever, but it probably lasted only a couple of minutes. And then after saying something like, "Say hello to your brother for us," They just walked off laughing, calm as can be. And Chloe was laughing too, and like I said, that was honestly worse than all the kicks and punches. Being jumped is one thing, but me being stupid, a gullible idiot, and believing that she was interested in me, that hurt stayed with me long after the bruises. I remember just lying there for a while, spitting out blood while my ribs ached, and as I realized that I could only see out of one eye. God knows why they didn't take my phone or shoes, but I was able to call myself a cab once I dragged myself off that deck and staggered back out into the street on the other side of that fence. When the driver asked what had happened, I told him that I'd fallen over. He didn't believe me, but he took me home anyway. I spent the next week just completely dead on the sofa with painkillers and ice packs after telling work that I just had a bad stomach bug. The ache stopped after a day or two, or 3 really, and I still stayed for a week, probably because I was depressed or something, and I just didn't want to admit it. I found out later that my brother got the video. He called me a few days after for the first time in years, and his voice sounded incredibly shaky. He said he was sorry, that he'd paid what he owed plus extra and got out of the game, and he basically begged me to forgive him too. I told him to F off at the time, but these days I do appreciate him reaching out because it meant a lot. Mom's happy we're talking again, even if it is awkward, but I'm still just jumpy going out after dark. This girl I thought was perfect turned out to be bait in someone else's fight, and the whole date was just theater from the start. It made me wonder how many other guys they've done it to, which other hands Chloe has held while leading them right into a trap like it was nothing. Dangerously cold-hearted, man. Dangerously cold-hearted. So back before the big cough, during the washout English summer of 2019, 7th rainiest on record, whoop-de-bloody-doo, I remember swiping through Tinder one afternoon in my flat. I don't know if anyone remembers Tinder around that time, but there were a lot of fake profiles set up by scammers. It got to the point where if a really fit girl appeared in my feed, I'd just be like, bot, and swipe left. But then that afternoon, as I'm sitting there swiping with the rain pittering and pattering on the windows, this absolute fox appeared in front of me, and I hesitated. Her name was Anna, 1 N by the way, and she looked like an elf, the Tolkien kind, but covered in tattoos. She also had these big green eyes, almost white gold hair, and whatever she did for exercise, it was doing her proud. There were pictures of her at music festivals and a nightclub and at some vegan cafe-looking place, and in every one she looked like a freaking supermodel. But for some reason, my now built-in bot detector was only giving off a mild alert. All of Anna's photos looked legitimate, so just in case she was actually real, I swiped right and then hoped for the best. A few hours later, my phone chimed with Tinder's signature tone. I got that little dopamine rush that came with knowing that I had a match, but when I saw who had matched me, I had 2 waves wash over me, each one made of distinctly different disbelief. Now, the first was, no effing way. That girl just swiped right on me, but the second was more like, there's no way this girl is real if she just swiped right on me. Now, not to sound too lacking in the self-esteem department, but I hardly consider myself Anna's type. So instead of going with my usual, hi there, how's it going, I just cut to the chase and asked her, are you real? She sent back a laughing emoji, and then after explaining why I'd asked her that, she seemed very flattered and most definitely not a bot. I then asked what kind of scam she was pulling, and if I went out with her, was I going to wake up in an ice bath the next morning with my kidney missing? Now, she sent me back another laughing emoji and then the text saying, only one way to find out, right? I asked her if she wanted to meet up for a drink, and she said sure, and asked where I was based. And then when I told her, she said something like, I can be there in 20 minutes. And the reply kind of knocked me for 6 because we'd only just matched and she wanted to meet right away. Every girl I'd matched with had wanted to chat for at least a few days before making arrangements, and yet there was this gorgeous nymph creature who wanted to meet little old me right away. And it made me think of the word scam all over again, because seriously, who the hell meets up with someone from the internet that they met that day? Well, Anna apparently, because after asking for my number, she gave me a call and explained her logic. The first thing I noticed was how pretty her voice sounded, and maybe this was like a purely subjective thing, but I found it almost hypnotic. Now, she was really well spoken, which I find very attractive as a rough northerner, but she had this really raspy, sleepy thing going too, which was also very attractive, but in a kind of calming ASMR sort of way. So right away I'm thinking, if this is a scam, it's going to be a very relaxing one. But when Anna explained herself, she actually made sense. Like I mentioned, we'd been having the worst summer for literally years in terms of rain, wind, and clouds. July looked more like early April in parts, and the entire country was watching their summer quite literally go down the drain. Anna said that she wanted to get out of the house and have some actual fun, even if it was just another indoor space. She also said that she was pretty stressed out and had been arguing with her family about stuff, so she wanted to get away for a while, if only for a few hours. She said I seemed cool and, more importantly, safe, in which case, why not meet me today? Now I started seeing it as a golden opportunity to cheer up a very pretty girl and quite possibly reap the benefits of having done so, whatever those benefits may be. Because after all, and in the words of Dolly Parton, I'm just a man. We met at this little bar maybe 5 minutes walk from my house. I said that I'd walk down after a quick shower, and granted it took me a while to get my appearance looking right, but when I got there, Anna was sitting there waiting for me. She was twice as beautiful in person, and the only thing I found slightly off-putting were her teeth. I don't mean they were ugly or anything. She didn't need any obvious dental work done, and her breath didn't smell bad or anything, so I'm assuming she brushed them before she left the house. And so while telling myself not to be so effing judgmental about an objectively gorgeous girl, I just sat down and we got chatting. Anna was a dream. I'm being honest. Now, it might sound crazy considering what I'm about to tell you shortly, but to this day, the first half of my date with Anna was the best I'd ever been on. Now, I don't harp about it too much, don't worry, but I feel like I've banged my drum about her enough already. But it was so much fun that when she came back with our 4th round of drinks and asked me a very unusual question, I didn't even hesitate. She came back to the table, put our pints of Guinnesses down, and said, "Listen, I got a bit of a favor to ask. No hard feelings if you say no, because it might seem a bit weird, but can I stay over at your place tonight?" In my head, I'm saying, say yes, say yes, say yes. And it definitely read on my face that I was delighted, and I still managed a pretty cool, "Sure, why not?" And then she kissed me. I know that sounds totally like and then everybody clap type moment, but like I said, it was the best date I've ever went on. She didn't just smile when I said yes, she beamed, and when she did, she looked radiant. So when this golden-haired elven queen leaned across the table and literally pulled me in for a kiss, I was too stunned to even kiss her back at first. When she pulled away, and with the entire bar looking at me like, "Who the F is this player?" she told me, "Sorry, I just really appreciate it, and you look really hot." And I did just about everything in my power to keep from falling off my chair. When we finished our pints, I swear my feet didn't touch the floor as we walked towards the door. I was walking on air. Then we got back to my place, and without going into too much detail, we spent the next hour or so doing something that required a shower afterwards and one taken together. Once we were done, dried and dressed, Anna asked if she could smoke in my flat. Now, she could already see an ashtray on my coffee table, but she was still polite enough to ask, another green flag, and so I told her, "Mi casa, su casa" kind of thing. I also told her if she wanted to smoke something a bit stronger, I had a bit of hash that I bought only a few days prior, and we could smoke some of that after I fixed us something to eat. Anna then suggested that she roll us a joint while I get started on food, which sounded like a great idea. And so I gave her my little rolling tin as she sat on the couch and then went off into the kitchen to prepare some tacos. Now, the way my flat was set up was with an open kitchen and living area, so while I'm in the kitchen, I could literally see Anna on my sofa, leaning over the rolling tin and making our spliff. Granted, I wasn't exactly watching her like a hawk or anything, but everything seemed kosher by the time she'd finished her rolling and lit the thing up. She took 2 poles and then offered it to me, but since I was busy frying up some marinated pork, I said that I'd take it in a minute or 2. And then once the pork was cooked nicely, I took it off the heat and walked over to Anna to take the joint from her. The first thing she said when I took it was, "Sit down with me." But I told her no, not yet, because I still had tacos to assemble. I was starving. I took 2 deep drags of the joint and then passed it back to her, and as I did, I noticed that she had this certain look about her. Slightly anxious, but also slightly excited. She joked about me being judgmental about her rolling abilities, so after assuring her it was a good effort, I walked back into the kitchen to carry on cooking. I remember rehydrating the corn tortillas that I had stored away when suddenly my hands started to feel almost loose on the panhandle. Not in a clumsy way, it was more of a subtle slowness, like my hands had suddenly been submerged in this warm water. Now, at first glance, it was nice and, more importantly, familiar, but then came what I can only describe as these golden waves rolling up from my chest and then flowing down my arms and legs. It felt like someone had poured warm honey into my veins, and I remember realizing that for some reason I wasn't hungry anymore. Everything softened at the edges. The light from the kitchen spots looked warmer, and the sizzle of the wet tortillas softening up in the pan started to sound almost distant. I turned to Anna and asked how much hash she had burned into that joint, and all she said in reply was, "You should come and sit down." Her voice was like velvet in my ear. She asked if I was almost done, and then when I nodded, my head felt all heavy, but in a way that was strangely pleasant. But then the warmth kept building and building until it went beyond just relaxing and started to almost thicken, almost like I had lining of syrup in my lungs and I was trying to breathe through it. I tried to flip the tortilla that I had in the pan and I found that I could barely operate the spatula. And that's when I started to realize that I wasn't just stoned and that something else was happening to me. I took the pan off the heat and told Anna that I needed to sit down for a minute. She asked if I was all right, and when I said I didn't know, the words came out slowly, like they had to swim up through the syrup that was filling my lungs. I sat down on the couch next to Anna, and when I looked up at the ceiling, it looked like it was breathing. My eyes wanted to close, and I felt strangely itchy, and as I felt my heart rate start to slow after a period of almost racing, I realized I could barely bring Anna's face into focus. There was no way smoking a bit of weed would do that to me, someone who smoked pretty much every night before bed. So as my chest started to feel tighter and tighter, I asked Anna, what did she put in that joint? Now, she didn't say ever, actually. I just found out later on, but at the time, all she said was, "Does it feel good?" And I could barely talk by that point. But I told her no, and that something wasn't right. But if I'm being honest, that was sort of a lie. I felt great, like I was floating through this heavy warmth. But then, as I was trying to get Anna to tell me what she'd given me, things took a horrible turn. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead, my fingers started tingling and going numb at the tips, and my legs started to feel detached, like they weren't responding to my brain anymore. I tried to stand up, but the room lurched hard and I had to grab the arm of the couch to stop myself from falling. I had to physically force my eyes open to keep them from closing, and I realized that I wasn't just breathing shallowly because I was high. It was because it was becoming more and more the case that I couldn't breathe at all. I started to panic, and I remember telling Anna to call 999 while thinking, "Don't pass out, don't pass out, please don't effing pass out." She scrambled for her phone as I slid back onto the couch, feeling my body start to shut down completely, and the last thing I remember clearly is her face hovering above me, and this terrible knowledge that if I passed out, I might not wake up. I remember hearing her voice at one point, cutting through the fog like, "Oh no, oh no, oh no, please wake up, you gotta wake up." I remember her shaking me too. I tried to answer, but my chest felt like it was full of cement, and my voice wouldn't seem to leave my throat. Every breath was a shallow, deliberate effort, and then everything just went dark again. I was convinced that I was going to die, and it sounds really dark to think about it now, but there was one point where Anna shook me awake, and I just thought, just let me die in peace. I know now that wasn't me thinking clearly. It was the drugs in my system, but even as I was on the verge of death, I still didn't know what was killing me. Even when I saw all these flashing lights across the ceiling and the paramedics were inside my flat and putting oxygen on me, I still thought that I had no chance, and I was weirdly just okay with it. I have a hazy memory of someone peeling one of my eyelids back and shining a light into my eye. I remember someone pinching my finger for some reason, and then after a sharp prick on my arm, it was like I was dragged back to life. Everything stayed hazy for a second, and there was nothing but this dull pressure in my arm, and then wham! My chest suddenly heaved, as it felt like someone pumped a load of air into my lungs. I could breathe again, and that felt amazing, but it came with this nauseating clarity that I'd most likely almost overdosed on some kind of opiate, and that Anna was to blame. I remember looking around to see only 2 paramedics in front of me. One was standing, and the other was putting a blanket around me saying, "It's okay, mate. We've got you. You're going to be all right." I managed a jittery thank you and then asked, "Where is she?" because I couldn't see Anna anywhere. I was told that she'd gone upstairs because she didn't like needles, and then without skipping a beat, the male paramedic asked me, "How much heroin did you smoke, mate?" I'd been unconscious at the time, but Anna had told them the truth about what she'd given me, and that allowed the paramedics to bring me back quickly and safely, which is something, I suppose. I also wasn't shocked to hear what it was because I had kind of figured it out by then, and while I was incredibly furious with her, I was just too exhausted and relieved to be alive to do anything but just sit there and answer the paramedics' questions. Basically because I didn't know how much I'd smoked and because Anna was now distraught upstairs and wouldn't come down, I had to go to the hospital. It was obviously also my first time taking a dose like that, so I was going to be in such an unstable condition, it was best that I spent the night in the hospital so they could keep an eye on me. I could stand enough to walk to the ambulance, but I was so jittery that I could barely get any words out, so when I pointed upstairs, the lady paramedic cut me off and said, "Don't worry about her. She's fine. Just worry about yourself." Now, I was more trying to make the point of I wanted the girl who spiked me to be removed from my home, but the lady was right there and that there were bigger fish to fry in the moment. At the hospital, they wheeled me through these 2 bright corridors, past doctors and nurses, and then asked me a bunch more questions as they drew more blood. And by the time I was given a bed, hooked up to an IV, and told to get some sleep, I felt this mix of exhausted relief and a deep, nauseating shame. I was alive, but barely, and all I could think was how close that warm, sleepy feeling had come to pulling me under, for good. Anna was gone by the time I got back to my flat, and all that was left was a note that said, "I'm sorry." Now, I thought about texting her, but I didn't even know what I'd say, and writing out a bunch of abuse wouldn't do any good, so I just deleted her number and tried to move on instead. It was hard, I won't lie. I was so disappointed I felt downright depressed for about a week afterwards, but I got over it, and as a close mate of mine put it nicely, I was able to charge it to experience. As in, sometimes it's best to just take the L, as it were, and move on having learned a lesson. And bloody hell, that Anna girl taught me one all right. One I'll never forget. I've been watching your channel for a while, and I kind of hoped that I'd never have a reason to write in, but that all changed a few weeks back, so here I am. I'm still kind of processing it, so I figured that it might help to write it all down. So, straight up, here's what happened. I'm 28, I'm single, and I work a decent job in the city. And then one random Thursday, I'm grabbing some coffee at this little spot near my office when this woman walks in. She looked to be a little older than me, maybe late 30s, early 40s, but oh my god, was she hot. Now, I'm subtly checking her out, and then we end up next to each other at the counter because this poor overworked barista managed to mess up both of our orders, and so I figured I'd shoot my shot. It turns out her name was Lauren, and she wasn't just beautiful either. She was smart, funny, confident, and flirty in a mature way that made me feel like I was the interesting one. I asked if she was single, and she said yes, and then after exchanging some cell phone numbers, I was riding high for the rest of the day. Now, I had to almost literally restrain myself from texting her too soon because I wanted, not really, I needed to play it cool. But when I got home, I dropped her a little casual text and went back and forth for a couple of days, getting to know each other a little better before I finally asked if she wanted to meet up. She said that she worked in marketing, loved hiking, and then mentioned how she had a middle school-aged kid like it made her radioactive. I told her that was none of my business and that I didn't care, which wasn't strictly true, but I wasn't about to let a little detail like that kill the vibes. I told her about how I love to cook and about my huge passion for my weekend basketball league, and she said both were really cute. And then when she asked what my favorite kind of food was and I said Italian, she suggested that we meet at this nice little Italian place downtown that I'd never been to. A couple of days later, the night of the date rolls around and I'm kind of nervous but also super excited. I picked her up from this nice condo building in a quieter part of town, and when she walked out, she looked incredible. She had this little black dress on and she smelled amazing, and the way she smiled and hugged me made me think that she was really into me, which was just a huge buzz. We drove to the restaurant, chatting all the while, and the conversation stayed great as they ordered drinks and food, both of which were fantastic. She was laughing at my dumb jokes, asking interesting questions that made her seem legitimately interested, and the whole while I'm just sitting there thinking either age gap, what age gap, or holy crap, this might really go somewhere. Now after dinner we decided to grab one more drink at a bar a few blocks away. It was a chill spot with some live music, but not so loud that we couldn't keep on talking. I was already wondering if I could see her again, and then when I asked, she just says, "Duh. Of course I want to see you again." And then we actually arranged a second date right then and there. We had the best time. The vibes were perfect, and then around 10:30, I walked her back to my car, and we walked close, and she slipped her arm into mine. It felt perfect, like it was the first step on the road to someplace special. But it was also around that time that I first noticed the headlights behind us. Some SUV had been behind us on the walk for maybe about a minute or two, but obviously that didn't have alarm bells going off in my head immediately. It was crawling along behind us, and I figured it was just looking for parking. As we got to my car and climbed in, the SUV was still there, but obviously I'm thinking, bro just wants my space, and I'm still not freaking out. But then, instead of taking my space, the car starts following me. It makes a couple of turns, nothing crazy, but it stays glued there. Now I'm thinking, huh? That's weird. But instead of saying anything, Lauren got very quiet and just kept checking the side mirror. I asked if everything was okay, and she just said that she's tired. But I could tell something was off, and I didn't push it. But I knew. I was starting to think, what's this guy's problem, and hoped that he'd quit before I got to Lauren's place to drop her off. And then suddenly, as we're approaching a red light, it speeds up alongside me and cuts me off. My heart jumped as I was like, uh-oh. And my first thought was how this guy was about to rob me at gunpoint. Two guys jump out of the SUV, big dudes too, and start walking toward my driver's side. And then before I can even react, the passenger door on my side flies open, and this older guy yanks me out by my collar. Now, he looks to be about 50, but he was majorly in shape and he could fight too. He just started swinging. Now, I got a few hits in, but they really did nothing, and I'm just waiting there for his buddy to get involved too, but he just sort of stayed back and watched like he was only there as backup. The first guy gets me on the floor at one point, and I'm yelling at Lauren to call the cops. But she's not listening. Instead, she gets out of my car and, while using the guy's name, tells him to stop. And that's when it clicked. It wasn't a robbery. This was her husband. Lauren wasn't single at all. She'd been cheating. She yelled something at him, and he yelled something back about how he'd followed us from the restaurant after putting some kind of tracking device on her phone or her car. He said she lied about working late, and I also gathered that they'd been married for something like 20 years. Now, by the time he lays off me, my shirt's ripped, my lip is bleeding, and Lauren had managed to actually get him off. Now, he wasn't hitting me anymore, but he'd still completely lost it, and it was like he was legitimately screaming in her face right there in front of the stoplight. All the commotion caused folks in the nearby houses to start coming out, and then I guess someone called the cops too, because they showed up pretty quick. They separated everyone, took statements as I sat on the curb with an ice pack someone had actually given me. I was just still sort of stunned something like that had even happened to me. I thought stuff like that only ever happened on reality TV and that real life was always way less dramatic, but I guess life imitates art sometimes and it's just the opposite way around. The cops figured out who the attackers were pretty fast, so the husband got hauled away in handcuffs as Lauren kept on apologizing to me. I didn't even know what to say. One minute I was on the best date of my entire life, and the next I was getting my head stomped on by Lauren's husband, who she claimed was a cheater himself. Once it was clear that I didn't need an ambulance or anything, I drove home in silence, leaving Lauren to make her own way home. My face was swollen, my knuckles were hurt, and my nice date shirt was torn and ruined. Lauren texted me a long apology the next morning explaining the whole situation, how she should have been upfront and how she never wanted me to get hurt. But I haven't replied to it, not yet anyway. Part of me is mad at her, but another feels bad for her. She just wanted to feel some excitement and connection, I guess. I mean, aside from the revenge she wanted. Sometimes I look back and sort of laugh at the clues that I missed. How she always wanted to meet at places away from her neighborhood and how she never invited me up to her place that night. How her phone was always face down. But she was so warm and fun that I didn't question it. Hard lesson and hard learned, I guess. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email, letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. I also have a true crime channel called Saturn Soul, all links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, happy summer solstice.